Well, we all know about the desperate staffing crunch in our long-term care facilities. Now the provincial government is offering thousands of dollars in bonuses to nurses to try to fill the gaping holes in staffing. The new bonuses are for registered nurses, LPNs, and personal care attendants to work in long-term care. The recruitment bonuses are up to $8,000 for registered nurses for 1 year of service, and the retention offer is up to $3,000 for RNs already working in long-term care. Yvette Coffey leads the province's Registered Nurses Union, and she's on the line right now. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, there you are. All right. So I just wonder, what was your reaction when you heard about the bonuses being offered to recruit and retain RNs in long-term care?
Well, we all know that our biggest challenge right now is opening up long-term care beds here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We have over 240 long-term care beds closed in the system related to the shortage of registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, and personal care attendants. But it does fall short, very short, and our other members are quite upset because I have been out talking about retention, and the budget that we had this past week did not say anything about retention for registered nurses and nurse practitioners. $3,000 to retain a registered nurse in long-term care, is it enough? No. Will it stabilize the system? I guess the government hopes it will, so that we can get to the backlog of surgeries and procedures by moving the patients who require long-term care out of our acute care beds, but we'll have to see.
So that's the retention piece. And what did you make of the recruitment bonus up to $8,000 for, RNs for, I guess, 1 year of service in exchange?
It's 1 year of service in exchange for $8,000. And my understanding is that this is currently open to any registered nurse currently working in our publicly funded healthcare system. So if you have a job in surgery at the Health Science, for instance, and you want to go to Pleasant View Towers to work, you can avail of that $8,000 sign-on bonus to work in long-term care for a year. But having seen what's been happening and the announcement in Nova Scotia this week with upwards of $20,000 for every single registered nurse that works in Nova Scotia, it's a slap in the face for registered nurses here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'm hearing from them loud and clear on that.
Okay. Well, let me go back to one point you made a moment ago. 240 beds right now closed. I mean, how many nurses would be required and other healthcare professionals to get those back open?
Well, I did see a figure from the CBC interview earlier with Eastern Health Authorities that it was 150 vacancies at Pleasant View Towers. I'm not sure if that's an accurate number or not, and I don't have access to the actual numbers. What I do know is that there's probably more than 240 long-term care beds closed, because since that information, we've also seen closures of beds in Gander. Lakeside Homes is not taking admissions at the moment, and we saw another long-term care unit close out in Placentia since that time.
Okay, so the numbers are stacking up at a time when Nova Scotia has obviously sweetened the deal, as you've laid out. I mean, when you're looking at what is on the table from the province here, you say it falls short. What should the province have done?
Well, when you look at what Nova Scotia is offering, the $20,000, upwards of $20,000 to registered nurses to stay in the system, it's a thank you, a recognition of the value, expertise and knowledge that registered nurses, nurse practitioners bring to the healthcare system. And we, right now in this province, are the lowest paid in Canada, which means we're the lowest paid in Atlantic Canada. And my fear is that we are going to lose more registered nurses out of the system. Last year, our vacancy rate increased 22% here in this province in a 6-month period from April to October. We cannot afford to keep bleeding out registered nurses out of our healthcare system. We will never get to the backlog of surgeries. We will never stabilize the nursing workforce, and we're certainly not going to see any reprieve for the emergency departments that are seeing all these patients while working short-staffed. The statistics are growing, and I had meetings this week with Workplace NL, and the latest statistics coming out of Workplace NL is that every 2 days a registered nurse is injured in this province. That equates to 175 registered nurses in a year. We can't afford that. The increased violence, the increased injury rates, if you look at what registered nurses are facing on a daily basis, the violence, working short, practically every single shift that they go in for, mandated overtime, whether it be working an extra 4 hours past your 12-hour shift to do a 16-hour shift or upwards of 24 hours, it's not sustainable. We're going to see more injuries, which means we're going to see more people out of the workplace. It is a vicious cycle here that's happening in this province.
I really want to know your thoughts on this gap between the recruitment and the retention bonuses, and potentially what you're hearing from members on the gap. How effective do you think it's going to be, and what are you hearing from members about it?
Well, what we're hearing from members is they're very upset. They're very upset. They're very frustrated, as am I, with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador at this point in time. You cannot look at a registered nurse who is there doing all this overtime, working without vacation, working without the inability to get time off, working short practically every shift, and offer them a lower amount of money to stay there and work in those conditions while offering somebody else $5,000 more. Now, is $8,000 enough? No, not when you compare what's going on in other provinces like Nova Scotia. So they're mad. The retention piece, I just don't get it. I keep talking about we're continue to lose registered nurses out of the system. We are never going to keep them if we do not offer them incentives to stay in the system at this point in time.
It's hard to square, like you say, with some of the data that you got with regard to nurse injuries. It sounds like what we need is more nurses, and certainly what you're saying is we need more nurses. But then, of course, we have to treat the ones that are there with respect. What do you think is the best strategy for the province to take, and particularly for your members to keep them here?
Well, in the budget this year, what we had hoped to hear and see was a retention strategy. There's lots of recruitment efforts going on with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. We had the Come Home Year recruitment initiatives upwards of $50,000 for a registered nurse to come home from away and take a permanent position in Newfoundland and Labrador. Then we also have registered nurses with private agencies that are working alongside of our members, making upwards of 2 to 3 times their salary. They have more control over their work life, about when they work, how often they work, and where they work. And you put all of that together, and you have that registered nurse who's been there holding the system together. And I do mean holding it together. When I look at Goose Bay Emergency Department, where you have between 1 and 2 RNs left out of 10, and the rest are either locums or private agencies. You look at the Health Science Emergency Department, and we've all seen the stories coming out in the media. They have lost over 50% of their staff in the last 2 years. The expertise that we're losing, these dedicated professionals that have made the decision to say, I'm done, I'm out of here. If we don't start looking at retention, which is a national call also, our national counterpart, Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions, we have done research. There's a research paper out, and it's about retention. But we're not seeing it. We saw lots of money invested in healthcare in Newfoundland and Labrador in the recent budget, but nothing for the retention of registered nurses. And you can have all the surgeons in the world who are ready and willing and able to do surgeries, but if you don't have registered nurses or nurse practitioners to care for those patients before, during, and after surgery, you're not getting surgery done.
Yvette Coffey, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Yvette Coffey is president of the Registered Nurses Union of Newfoundland and Labrador.